My name is Gabriel, and I think the truest version of my marriage ended not with a fight, but with the gentle chime of a text message. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of bland, in-between hour where you're just waiting for the day to officially be over. I was reheating pasta, my wife, Naomi, was upstairs, already in her silky pajama set, scrolling through her phone. We'd settled into that quiet, comfortable rhythm that I'd mistaken for peace. My own phone buzzed on the granite countertop. It wasn't from Naomi. The name on the screen was unfamiliar. Margot, from Cedar Brook. Cedar Brook. That was the name of the town that had swallowed my wife's grief for the past 3 years. A sleepy, picturesque place 2 hours north where her mother, Eleanor, had lived in the same quaint cottage for 40 years before she passed. Naomi had inherited the house, and after the funeral, a new ritual was born, the weekly visit. Every single Sunday, like clockwork, Naomi would pack a small overnight bag. She'd kiss my cheek, her eyes already distant. I just need to be there, Gabe, to feel close to her, to tidy the garden. You understand. Her voice would soften into that fragile, breathy tone she'd adopted since the loss. It's my healing. And I understood. Or I forced myself to. My own parents were alive and robust, 1,000 miles away. I couldn't fathom the loss. So I became the supportive pillar. I'd wave her off, spend my Sundays watching sports in a too-quiet house, answering her check-in texts, the roses are blooming, found her old recipe box, and welcoming her home Monday evening, looking drained, but she'd say, a little more whole. For 3 years. Every week. I stared at the name on my phone. Margot, from Cedar Brook. A neighbor, maybe? Naomi had mentioned a few, an elderly man who checked the mail, a young couple down the lane, but never a Margot. I opened the message. There was no greeting, just a single, crystal-clear photograph. And my world, that quiet, comfortable world, simply vaporized. The photo was taken from across a street, slightly zoomed, but devastating in its detail. It was a sunny afternoon on a leafy lane I recognized as the one leading to her mother's cottage. There was a park bench. On that bench sat Naomi. She wasn't alone. She was laughing, her head thrown back in a way I hadn't seen in years, a hand resting on the shoulder of a man who was not me. He was handsome in a rugged, settled way, maybe a few years older than us. He had his arm around her, pulling her close, and between them, standing on the bench, one small hand in each of theirs, was a little girl. She was beaming, maybe 3 years old, with Naomi's exact same espresso brown curls and a gap-toothed smile.
Beneath the photo, a second message from Margot appeared. "I'm so sorry, but someone had to tell you." The little girl's name is Lily. They've lived here in Eleanor's house for the last 2.5 years. The reheated pasta in the microwave beeped, a shrill, absurd sound in the sudden void. I heard the floorboards creak above me. Naomi, my wife, was upstairs. But the woman in the photo, the mother on that bench, she was a stranger. To understand the magnitude of the lie, you have to understand the performance. Naomi's grief was a masterpiece. After Eleanor died, a light in Naomi dimmed. She became softer, quieter, more dependent. She'd cling to me at night, whispering, "Don't ever leave me, Gabe." She lost interest in the big, ambitious projects that used to define her career as an interior designer. She said the world felt too loud, that she needed simplicity, quiet, the solace of her mother's home. I felt needed, crucial. I was the anchor in her storm of sorrow. The Sunday ritual started a few months after the funeral. "It's too hard to go for just a day," she'd say, her eyes welling. "I need to wake up there, to breathe the air." I offered to go with her, every time. Her refusal was always gentle, laced with a pain I was too careful to poke. "It's something I have to do alone, my love. It's between me and Mom." And I I built my life around her absence. I took on more freelance coding work to fill the silent Sundays. I told friends we were navigating her grief. I wore my patience as a badge of honor, the devoted husband. The clues were there. I just sanctified them as part of her healing. The new, subtle perfume she'd sometimes come home with, not Eleanor's lavender, but something with notes of vanilla and orange blossom. The soap at the house, she'd explain. The renewed energy she'd sometimes have on a Monday, a faint flush on her cheeks. The country air, she'd sigh. The way she'd slowly stop talking about having our own children. With everything with Mom, I just don't feel stable enough to bring a life into the world. Not yet. Not yet. She was right. She was already raising a life in the world. Just not with me. Standing there in the kitchen, the photo burning in my vision, the arithmetic was brutal and instantaneous. A 3-year-old girl. Conceived roughly 3 years ago. Around the time the healing Sunday visits became a non-negotiable weekly pilgrimage. She hadn't been grieving. She'd been building. A parallel life, a full-time family, while I was her part-time husband, her weekend widower, financing her double existence through the career I worked to maintain for us. A cold clarity washed over me, sharper than any anger. Anger would come later in terrifying waves. But in that moment, it was pure, surgical understanding. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. I quickly locked my phone, slid it into my pocket, and turned to the microwave, pulling out the steaming container of pasta. My hands weren't even shaking. "Something smells good," she said, patting into the kitchen, offering a small, weary smile. The perfect portrait of a woman drained from a weekend of solitary remembrance. "Just leftovers," I said, my voice remarkably even. I looked at her, really looked at her. The faint lines by her eyes that I'd attributed to sadness, but were perhaps from laughter. The strength in her arms I'd thought came from gardening, but maybe from lifting a child. I had been living with a masterful illusion. "How was Cedar Brook?" I asked, the question tasting like ash. She leaned against the counter, gazing out the window. "Quiet, peaceful. I pruned the apple tree. It felt good, like I was connecting with her." She turned to me, her eyes glistening with practiced sincerity. "Thank you for always giving me this space, Gabe. I don't know what I'd do without you." That was the line that broke the dam inside me, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. I just nodded. "I'm glad it helps." I needed proof. Not just a photo from a stranger. I needed the architecture of the lie. The next day, I called in sick to work. The moment Naomi left for her design studio, I became a ghost in my own life. I accessed our shared cloud account, the one she used to back up photos of Mom's garden. I navigated through folders of roses and hydrangeas until I found a hidden album mislabeled Tax Docs 2019. Inside weren't receipts. There were hundreds of pictures. Naomi with the man from the bench. His name, I would learn, was David. Naomi heavily pregnant, smiling in a sun-drenched nursery that was not in our home. Naomi cradling a newborn in a rocking chair I'd never seen. Naomi, David, and the little girl Lily blowing out candles on a birthday cake. A first Christmas, a vacation at a lake, a whole vibrant, loving family chronicle, documented week by week, while she texted me about wilting peonies and the melancholic silence of an empty house. I sat in my desk chair, consuming the evidence of my own oblivion. I felt hollowed out. The greatest betrayal wasn't the other man. It was the other life. the complete walled-off universe she had created using her mother's death as both the foundation and the alibi. I contacted Margot. She was the wife of the elderly man down the lane. She was apologetic, furious on my behalf. "We all thought you knew," she said, her voice hushed, "that you were separated or something, but then she always wore a wedding ring, and she'd call you sometimes, and it just felt wrong. David's been in town for years. He owns the hardware store."
Everyone knows him. They just appeared as a couple after her mother passed. We assumed you were done. I asked her for one more thing. Not a confrontation, just a date. The next Sunday. I didn't pack a bag. I just got in my car and drove the 2 hours to Cedar Brook. I didn't go to the cottage. I parked down the leafy lane in a spot Margot had suggested with a view of the front garden. And I waited. At 11 a.m., the front door of Eleanor's cottage opened. Naomi walked out, not in her usual grieving daughter jeans and sweater, but in a bright yellow sundress. She was holding Lily's hand. The little girl was chattering, pointing at a butterfly. David followed, locking the door, then sweeping Lily up onto his shoulders. Naomi leaned into him, kissing his cheek. They looked effortless, whole. They walked down the path toward the town center, a perfect portrait of a Sunday morning. I didn't get out. I didn't scream. I just watched. I watched the life I was supposedly too loud, too overwhelming, too present for. I watched my wife's real family. The drive home was the quietest 2 hours of my life. The grief, when it hit, wasn't for Naomi. It was for the man I'd been, the careful, accommodating fool, and it was for the little girl, an innocent pawn in this exquisite deceit. Revenge, I decided, would not be noisy. It would be a silent, precise dismantling. It would be the withdrawal of my complicity. On Monday evening, Naomi returned. She seemed lighter, her skin glowing. "You look well," I said, from my spot on the sofa. "It was a good weekend," she sighed, dropping her bag. "The lilacs are starting. Mom's favorite." She came over, bent to kiss the top of my head. "I missed you." I looked up at her. I held her gaze, and I saw a flicker of something, not guilt, but assessment. She was checking to see if her performance had landed. "Naomi," I said, my voice calm, empty, "we need to talk about the finances. My freelance work is drying up. I'm going to need to pause transferring money into the joint account for the Cedar Brook property, taxes, and upkeep. You'll have to handle it from your own account for a while." Her face froze. The upkeep on the cottage, the healing trips, they were funded by me. "Oh," she said, the breathy tone returning. "But Gabe, it's the only thing that keeps me going." "I know, and I've supported it for 3 years, but I can't anymore. You'll have to find another way." It was the first thread. I began pulling others, gently, methodically. I had a work emergency on a Sunday and couldn't drive her to her car after she'd taken it in for servicing. I slowly disengaged from the emotional labor of our shared life, forcing her to manage the logistics of 2 households. I became politely, impenetrably distant. The strain began to show. She became irritated, then pleading. "You're pulling away from me when I need you most," she cried one night. I simply looked at her. "I've been here the whole time, Naomi. Where have you been?" She recoiled, as if slapped. The final move was legal, not emotional. I hired a forensic accountant and a ruthless divorce attorney. I provided the hidden photo album, the testimonial from Margot, the bank records showing my funds maintaining her second life. We filed for divorce on grounds of adultery and constructive desertion.
We also filed a civil suit for the return of the marital funds fraudulently used to support her separate family, funds that amounted to tens of thousands of dollars. The papers were served not at our home, but at David's hardware store in Cedar Brook, while David and Naomi were both there. I never spoke to David. I never confronted him. He was just a man living his life, likely fed his own set of lies about the lonely, grieving divorcee in her mother's house. The fallout was nuclear in the quietest way. The facade shattered. Naomi's fragile grief persona evaporated, replaced by a furious, cornered woman. She called, she screamed, she sobbed, she threatened. "You're destroying my life!" she shrieked. "You already destroyed ours," I said, and hung up. I heard through the legal back channels that David was stunned, that the town of Cedar Brook now knew the truth, that the lovely young family in Eleanor's cottage was built on a bedrock of bigamy and theft. I didn't attend the hearings. My lawyer handled it. I got the divorce. I recouped a significant portion of the money. The cottage, tangled in the mess, had to be sold.
My revenge was not in taking her other life from her. It was in exposing that it was never hers to ethically have. It was in removing myself, my money, and my silent sanction from her equation. I left her to the reality she'd built, a man who now looked at her with doubt, a town that saw her differently, a life stripped of its fraudulent funding and its convenient, pitying anchor 2 hours south. Sometimes I think about Lily, that little girl with Naomi's curls. I hope she is loved. I hope the chaos of the adults doesn't touch her. In a strange way, she was the only honest thing in the whole arrangement, a living consequence. As for me, the silence in my house is no longer something to be filled. It's mine. It's clean. It's honest. Naomi taught me that grief can be a costume, a set you build to perform a tragedy, while living a comedy or another tragedy just off stage. My healing didn't come from visiting a quiet town. It came from finally leaving the theater of my own marriage. The strongest prison isn't made of bars. It's built from your own willingness to believe a beautiful, heartbreaking lie. And the key to that prison is always, always the quiet, devastating truth.